The searing Idaho sun beat down on the dusty trail, a relentless hammer against the vast, indifferent landscape. 19-year-old Lee Wei, her dark red cheongsam a startling splash of color against the faded browns and greens, pressed a hand to her brow, her vision shimmering with heat and exhaustion. Days of travel, first by ship across the endless ocean, then by a series of increasingly rough wagons, had worn her down to a thin, brittle thread. Her sister, May, the intended bride, was far away, safe in their ancestral home, blissfully unaware of the cruel twist of fate that had sent Lee Wei in her stead. A family debt, a desperate plea from their aging father, and Lee Wei, ever the quiet, dutiful daughter, had volunteered, her heart a heavy stone in her chest. The thought of stepping into a life not meant for her, into the arms of a stranger, was a constant gnawing fear. The wagon lurched, dust billowing, and she gripped the wooden side, her knuckles white. She was an outsider here, a solitary blossom in a field of thorns, and the enormity of her deception weighed on her with every breath. The world around her was vast and untamed, a stark contrast to the meticulously cultivated gardens of her homeland. Here, survival was etched onto every sun-baked rock, every wind-whipped sagebrush. She closed her eyes, picturing May's gentle smile, a pang of longing piercing through her weariness. This journey was for May, for their family, a sacrifice she had made without hesitation, even as her own future stretched before her, an unknown, frightening expanse. The driver, a grizzled man with a perpetually squinting gaze, grunted, "Almost there, little lady. Last stretch." Lee Wei offered a weak nod, her throat too dry for words. The air was thick with the scent of dust, sun-baked earth, and something wild and untamed. The very essence of this new world she was being forced to inhabit. Her hands, usually skilled with embroidery needles, now felt clumsy and useless. She wondered what kind of man awaited her, the cowboy who had sent for a bride. Would he be kind? Cruel? Would he see through her deception, or would she be able to maintain the fragile facade of May, the sister who was meant to be here? The questions swirled in her mind, a relentless current against her fading resolve. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, a beautiful yet ominous backdrop to her arrival. The wagon finally pulled to a stop before a humble, weathered cabin nestled against a backdrop of towering, silent mountains. The air was still, save for the distant cry of a hawk, and a profound silence seemed to settle over the scene, broken only by the creak of the wagon wheels. A man emerged from the cabin, tall and lean, with a rugged handsomeness etched by sun and hard living. He wore a worn leather vest and a faded bandana around his neck. His eyes, the color of a clear summer sky, held a flicker of expectation, then a subtle shift, a moment of confusion, as his gaze met Lee Wei's. This was not the woman he had seen in the small, faded photograph. This was not May. Lee Wei's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Her deception, so carefully guarded, felt suddenly transparent, laid bare under his unwavering gaze. She swallowed, her throat tight. "Hello," she managed, her voice a fragile whisper, barely audible above the wind. The man stepped closer, his presence commanding, yet not overtly threatening. He stopped a few feet from the wagon, his hands resting on his hips. "You ain't May," he stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of anger but heavy with observation. It wasn't a question, but a simple, undeniable truth. Lee Wei felt a flush creep up her neck. There was no point in denying it. The truth, however painful, had to be spoken. She took a steadying breath, summoning a strength she didn't know she possessed. "No," she admitted, her gaze meeting his, a spark of defiance mingling with her fear. "I am Lee Wei. My sister, she could not come. I came in her place." She braced herself for his anger, for the inevitable rejection. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, always ending with her being sent back, a failure, a disgrace. But the cowboy simply continued to study her, his expression unreadable, a silent testament to the vast, unspoken thoughts swirling behind his piercing blue eyes. The silence stretched, a taut wire between them, filled with unspoken questions and the heavy weight of their unexpected meeting. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and distort the reality of their encounter. The cowboy, whose name was Joshua, finally broke the silence, his voice still low, but with a hint of something deeper, a curiosity that surprised Lee Wei. "Why?" he asked, his gaze still fixed on her, unwavering. "Why did you come?" Lee Wei hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, how much truth he could bear. She looked around at the stark, beautiful landscape, the rugged mountains, the endless sky, so different from the manicured beauty of her home. "My family, we owe a debt," she began, her voice gaining a little strength, finding a path through her fear. "My father, he is old. May is delicate. I am stronger. I offered to come." It was a simplified truth, but it held the essence of her sacrifice. She watched his face for any sign of judgment, of anger, but his expression remained a stoic mask. He simply nodded slowly, absorbing her words, his eyes seeming to peer beyond the surface, into the depths of her resolve. "You came a long way for a debt," Joshua observed, a hint of something unreadable in his tone. He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but to gesture towards the cabin. "Come inside. It's getting dark." Lee Wei descended from the wagon, her legs stiff, her cheongsam catching on the dusty ground. She followed him, her steps tentative, into the small, sparsely furnished cabin. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls, and the scent of wood smoke filled the air, a comforting warmth against the chill of the evening. Joshua gestured to a wooden chair by the simple table. "Sit," he said, and Lee Wei obeyed, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the few possessions, a rifle leaning against the wall, a stack of worn books, a simple cot covered with a rough blanket. It was a man's home, practical and unadorned, a stark contrast to the intricate beauty of her own family's house. He poured 2 cups of water from a pitcher, offering one to her. "You must be thirsty." Lee Wei took the cup, her fingers brushing his, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt through her. She drank deeply, the cool water a balm to her parched throat. The silence stretched again, less tense this time, more contemplative. Joshua sat opposite her, his elbows on the table, his gaze still on her, a silent conversation unfolding between them in the flickering firelight. The next morning, the sun, a blazing orb in the vast blue sky, streamed through the cabin window, waking Lee Wei from a fitful sleep. She had spent the night on the cot, Joshua on a bedroll by the fireplace, a silent arrangement that spoke volumes about their strange, unexpected cohabitation. The air was already warm, promising another scorching day. She rose, her body aching, and found Joshua already outside chopping wood, his muscles flexing with each swing of the axe. The rhythmic thud of the blade against the wood was the only sound, a primal beat against the stillness of the morning. When he came inside, wiping sweat from his brow, he found her attempting to smooth the wrinkles from her cheongsam, a futile effort against the rigors of travel. He watched her for a moment, then said, "There's coffee on the fire, and some dried jerky." Lee Wei nodded, her stomach rumbling with hunger. She ate slowly, savoring the unfamiliar taste of the jerky, while Joshua watched her, his silence a constant presence. Finally he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "You said you're strong. You willing to work?" Lee Wei met his gaze, her chin lifting slightly. "Yes," she affirmed, her voice clear and firm. "I am willing to work. I will earn my keep." She understood the unspoken implication. She was not his intended bride, but she could still be useful, still fulfill a purpose. It was a chance, however small, to prove her worth, to secure her place in this harsh, new world. Joshua nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. "All right," he said. "There's water to be fetched from the well, and the garden needs weeding." He spoke with a quiet authority, an expectation that she would follow his instructions. Li Wei rose, ready to begin, a sense of purpose slowly starting to bloom within her. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tempered with a growing resolve. She was Li Wei, not Mei, and she would face this new life on her own terms, with her own strength. The sun climbed higher, casting long, stark shadows across the dusty yard, marking the beginning of her new, uncertain life. Days bled into weeks, each one a testament to Li Wei's resilience and quiet determination. She learned to fetch water from the well, the heavy buckets straining her slender arms. But she never complained. She toiled in the small, struggling garden, coaxing life from the arid soil, her delicate hands, once accustomed to silk and thread, now calloused and stained with earth. She cooked simple meals over the open fire, her knowledge of traditional Chinese cuisine slowly adapting to the limited ingredients of the frontier. Joshua, for his part, remained a man of few words, his presence a steady, unwavering anchor in her new world. He watched her, often from a distance, his sky-blue eyes observing her every movement, every subtle shift in her demeanor. He never mentioned May again, never questioned her past, allowing her to carve out her own space, to define her own identity in his quiet home. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a breathtaking array of fiery colors, Li Wei sat on the porch, mending a tear in her cheongsam, the fabric now faded and worn. Joshua emerged from the cabin, carrying a stack of firewood, and paused beside her. "You do good work, Li Wei," he said, his voice a low rumble, the words simple, yet carrying a weight of sincerity that surprised her. Li Wei looked up, a faint flush rising to her cheeks. "Thank you, Joshua," she replied, her voice soft. It was the most direct compliment he had given her, and it warmed her in a way the evening fire could not. He settled onto the porch steps, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "It's not an easy life out here," he continued, his voice contemplative. "Lonely sometimes, but there's a beauty to it too, a quiet strength." Li Wei nodded, understanding. She had begun to see that beauty herself, in the vast, untamed landscape, in the resilience of the few plants that managed to thrive, in the silent companionship of Joshua. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with the sounds of the evening, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was a silence that spoke of shared experience, of a growing understanding between two strangers brought together by a twist of fate. Li Wei continued to mend her dress, her fingers moving with practiced ease, but her heart felt lighter, a fragile seed of hope beginning to sprout in the fertile ground of their shared solitude. The fragile peace of their existence was shattered one sweltering afternoon by the distant sound of gunfire. Li Wei, tending to the small vegetable patch, froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Joshua, who had been repairing a fence, dropped his hammer, his head snapping up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. The shots came again, closer this time, sharp cracks that echoed through the otherwise still air. "Stay inside," Joshua commanded, his voice urgent, his hand already on the rifle he kept propped against the cabin wall. He didn't wait for her reply, moving with a swift, predatory grace towards the edge of their property, his figure silhouetted against the relentless sun. Li Wei hesitated for only a moment. Her instincts screamed at her to obey, to hide, but a surge of fierce protectiveness, a feeling she hadn't known she possessed, propelled her forward. She couldn't simply cower while Joshua faced an unknown threat. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, its weight surprisingly comforting in her trembling hands. She peered through the narrow slit of the cabin window, her breath catching in her throat. 3 figures on horseback were approaching, dust rising in plumes behind them. They were rough men, their faces grim, their intent clearly hostile. Joshua stood his ground, his rifle held ready, a solitary sentinel against the approaching danger. "What do you want?" Joshua's voice cut through the air, low and steady, belying the tension in his stance. One of the riders, a burly man with a scarred face, laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Heard you got yourself a little lady, Joshua. Thought we'd pay a visit." Lee Way felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. They weren't just after Joshua, they were after her. She gripped the poker tighter, her knuckles white. She was no fighter, but she would not be taken easily. The sun beat down, intensifying the already suffocating heat, and the air crackled with unspoken threats. The dust, stirred by the horses' hooves, hung heavy, a veil over the unfolding drama. This was the Wild West, she realized with a chilling certainty, and survival here demanded more than just hard work. It demanded a willingness to fight, to protect what little one had. The standoff escalated quickly. The scarred man, whose name was Silas, dismounted, his 2 companions remaining on horseback, flanking him like loyal hounds. Joshua, though outnumbered, held his position, his rifle unwavering. "You got no business here, Silas," Joshua warned, his voice a low growl. "Turn back." Silas merely smirked, his eyes, dark and predatory, sweeping towards the cabin, as if he could sense Lee Way's presence within. "Oh, but we do, Joshua. Heard you're sitting on some prime grazing land, and a pretty little bird, too." Lee Way's blood ran cold. The poker felt suddenly inadequate, a child's toy against the brutal reality of their threat. She watched, her heart a frantic drum, as Silas took another step forward, his hand slowly reaching for the pistol at his hip. "I won't tell you again," Joshua said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet filled with a chilling finality. The air was thick with tension, stretched taut as a bowstring. The sun, directly overhead, beat down mercilessly, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, the beads of sweat on Joshua's brow, the grim determination etched on his face. Suddenly, Silas lunged, drawing his pistol with a practiced ease. But Joshua was faster. The crack of his rifle echoed through the valley, sharp and deafening. Silas stumbled back, a scream tearing from his throat, clutching his arm, blood blooming dark against his shirt. His companions, startled, fumbled with their own weapons. Joshua, without hesitation, fired again, and one of the horses reared, its rider thrown to the ground with a sickening thud. The remaining rider, seeing the ferocity of Joshua's defense, spurred his horse and fled, leaving his injured comrades behind. Lee Way, who had flinched at the sound of the shots, now watched in stunned silence as Joshua, his face grim, approached the fallen men. He was a force of nature, she realized, a quiet, protective storm in this desolate landscape. Joshua, after securing the 2 injured men and tying them to a tree, returned to the cabin, his face still etched with the grim reality of the confrontation. Lee Way met him at the door, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she reached out a tentative hand to touch his arm. He shook his head, his gaze softening slightly as it met hers. "No," he said, his voice rough. "You all right?" Lee Way nodded, clutching the iron poker tightly. "Yes, I saw." She looked towards the bound men, then back at Joshua. "What will you do with them?" Joshua sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Take them to the sheriff in town. They won't bother us again." The sun was beginning its descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the violence that had just unfolded. The adrenaline slowly receded, leaving Leeway feeling weak in the knees. Joshua, sensing her lingering fear, gently took the poker from her hand and placed it back by the fireplace. "You were ready to fight," he observed, a hint of surprise in his voice. Leeway managed a small, shaky smile. "I wasn't going to let them hurt you, or take me." Her words, spoken with a quiet conviction, seemed to hang in the air between them, a declaration of an unspoken bond. Joshua's gaze lingered on her, a profound emotion flickering in his blue eyes, something deeper than gratitude, something akin to understanding, or perhaps recognition. He didn't speak, but the silence between them was different now, no longer a void, but a space filled with shared experience, with a newly forged connection. The vast, indifferent landscape outside seemed to shrink, made smaller by the intensity of the moment, by the sudden, undeniable closeness that had sprung up between them in the face of danger. The incident with Silas and his men marked a turning point. The unspoken understanding between Joshua and Lee Way deepened, becoming a quiet, unwavering foundation for their lives together. The air of formality, though never explicitly stated, began to dissipate, replaced by a comfortable familiarity. Lee Way found herself anticipating Joshua's return from his work, a sense of quiet contentment settling over her when he was near. She no longer felt like an imposter, but an integral part of this small, isolated world they shared. She continued her chores, her movements more confident now, her hands no longer trembling with uncertainty. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars begin to prick the velvet canvas of the night sky, Joshua spoke, his voice unusually soft. "Lee Way," he began, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I know you came here for your sister, for your family." Lee Way looked at him, her heart quickening. She braced herself, wondering if this was the moment he would send her away, finally acknowledging the deception that had brought her here. But his next words surprised her. "But I'm glad it was you who came." He turned to face her, his blue eyes holding a warmth she hadn't seen before, a depth of emotion that took her breath away. "You're strong, resilient, and you've made this place feel like home." Leeway felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief, gratitude, and a profound, unexpected joy. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let them fall. "Joshua," she whispered, her voice thick with feeling, "this is my home now, with you." The words, simple and heartfelt, sealed their connection, a silent promise under the vast, star-dusted sky. The wind, which had once felt so desolate, now seemed to whisper tales of hope and belonging. The mountains, once a symbol of her isolation, now seemed to embrace them, silent witnesses to their burgeoning bond. The following months brought a gentle rhythm to their days, a quiet unfolding of shared life. The summer heat gave way to the crisp air of autumn, then the first dusting of snow, transforming the landscape into a stark, beautiful canvas of white. Leeway, with Joshua's help, learned to prepare for the long, cold winter, her movements now practiced and efficient. They worked side by side, felling small trees for firewood, mending leaks in the cabin roof, their unspoken communication a testament to their growing bond. One particularly cold evening, a blizzard raging outside, they sat by the roaring fire, the only light in the cabin. Joshua, usually so reserved, began to speak of his past, of the hard times that had brought him to this remote corner of the world, of the dreams he had once held, long since buried under layers of hardship and solitude. Leeway listened, her heart aching for the loneliness he had endured, for the silent strength he had carried. When he finished, she reached out, her hand gently covering his. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Joshua," she said, her voice soft, yet filled with a profound conviction. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, and a soft smile, one she had rarely seen, touched his lips. "No," he agreed, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand. "I don't." The storm outside raged, but within the small cabin a warmth bloomed, a quiet triumph against the harshness of the world. The snow piled high against the windows, but inside, their connection, forged in adversity and nurtured by shared experience, glowed with a steady, unwavering light. This was a love born not of initial attraction or grand pronouncements, but of shared struggle, mutual respect, and a deep, abiding understanding. It was a love that had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger, more resilient. As the blizzard howled its mournful song, Leeway leaned her head against Joshua's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her ear. She had come to this land as a reluctant stand-in, a silent sacrifice, but she had found something far more precious than she could have ever imagined. She had found a home, and the love that promised to endure, a quiet, unwavering declaration of, "I'll choose you forever." The vast, indifferent world outside was still there, but within their small cabin, illuminated by firelight and sustained by their bond, they had found their own universe, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the unexpected beauty of a life truly lived.